The sun was setting, casting a golden hue over the bustling airport. People rushed to their gates, dragging suitcases and clutching boarding passes. Among them was a man who stood out not because of his appearance, but because of the aura he carried. He moved with purpose, his steps steady and confident, as if he owned the space around him. This wasn't arrogance, it was authority. The man was none other than the director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, one of the most powerful positions in the country. Yet today he was just another traveler trying to get home after a long day. He had spent hours in meetings with top intelligence officials from across the globe, discussing matters that could shape national security for years to come. His mind was still processing the details when he entered the terminal. Dressed casually in a dark blazer, jeans, and polished shoes, he blended into the crowd well enough. There were no bodyguards flanking him, no entourage announcing his arrival. He preferred it that way. For someone in his position, anonymity was rare, and he cherished these quiet moments when he could simply be another face in the crowd. As he approached the security checkpoint, 2 officers stationed nearby began to take notice. They weren't part of the TSA team managing the lines, but rather local law enforcement personnel patrolling the area. One of them nudged the other, nodding toward the man now pulling his carry-on bag behind him. Their eyes narrowed slightly, studying him from head to toe. To anyone else, it might have seemed like routine observation. After all, airports required vigilance. But there was something more insidious at play here. Their focus wasn't on potential threats or suspicious behavior. It was on the color of his skin. The director didn't notice them at first. His thoughts were elsewhere, replaying snippets of the meeting and planning what he needed to address once he returned to headquarters. But then, one of the officers stepped forward, blocking his path. "Excuse me, sir," the officer said, his tone clipped and demanding. "Can I see your ID?" The request itself wasn't unusual. People were often asked for identification at airports, but the way it was delivered sent a chill down the director's spine. It wasn't curiosity or professionalism driving the question. It was suspicion, laced with hostility. Without hesitation, the director reached into his pocket and pulled out his wallet. He flipped it open to reveal his official government ID, complete with his name, photograph, and title, Director of the FBI. Anyone familiar with such credentials would recognize their authenticity immediately. But instead of backing off, the officers exchanged skeptical glances. One muttered under his breath about counterfeit documents, while the other grabbed his radio and called for backup. Within moments, several more uniformed officers appeared, forming a loose circle around the director. Passers-by slowed down to watch, some stopping entirely to film the unfolding scene. Despite the rising tension, the director remained calm. Years of experience had taught him how to handle pressure without losing composure. Still, anger simmered beneath the surface. He knew exactly what was happening here. It wasn't about stolen property or fake IDs. It was about prejudice. These officers saw a black man walking through the airport and assumed the worst. Never mind that he held one of the highest-ranking positions in the country. Never mind that his credentials were legitimate. All they saw was someone who didn't fit their narrow idea of what power and authority looked like. The director tried reasoning with them, explaining who he was and why they should trust the evidence right in front of them. But the officers weren't listening. Instead, they grew bolder, accusing him of carrying illegal items in his briefcase. When he opened it to show them nothing but papers and a laptop, they accused him of tampering with evidence. Each accusation was wilder than the last, yet they clung to them desperately, refusing to admit their mistake. By now, a small crowd had gathered, whispering among themselves and recording videos on their phones. Some looked horrified, others confused, but everyone was watching intently. For the director, this moment was surreal. Here he was, someone entrusted with protecting the nation from threats both domestic and foreign, being treated like a criminal. And it wasn't just humiliating, it was dangerous. If this could happen to him with all his resources and connections, what hope did ordinary citizens have? He thought about the countless stories he'd heard over the years, tales of innocent people wrongfully detained or worse because of racial profiling. Now, he was living one of those stories himself. But even as frustration threatened to boil over, the director kept his cool. He knew losing his temper wouldn't help. Instead, he focused on finding a way to de-escalate the situation. "Do you know who I am?" he asked finally, his voice firm but controlled. The lead officer hesitated, clearly unsure how to respond. "We'll let the system decide that," he replied, attempting to sound authoritative, but his words rang hollow, betraying the fear creeping into his expression. It was during this standoff that a senior official from airport security arrived on the scene. Unlike the officers, this man recognized the director instantly. His eyes widened in shock as he took in the chaos surrounding him. "What's going on here?" he demanded, his voice cutting through the noise. The officers stammered, trying to explain themselves, but their excuses only highlighted their bias further. As the truth dawned on them, panic set in. One dropped to his knees, pleading for mercy. Another followed suit, tears streaming down his face as he begged for forgiveness. The transformation was startling. They had gone from accusatory and aggressive to desperate and broken in mere seconds. By now, word of the incident had spread throughout the airport. News crews arrived, eager to capture the drama unfolding before them. The crowd grew larger, buzzing with speculation and outrage. Social media lit up with posts about the event, hashtags trending within minutes. For the officers involved, the realization of their colossal error hit hard. They had targeted someone untouchable, someone whose influence extended far beyond their wildest imaginations. And now, they faced not only professional consequences but public humiliation as well. Yet despite the gravity of the situation, the director remained composed. He understood that this wasn't just about him, it was about exposing the flaws in a system that allowed such injustices to occur. While he appreciated the apologies and groveling, he knew that true change wouldn't come from punishing individuals alone. It required addressing the root causes of racism and bias within law enforcement. As the cameras rolled and reporters shouted questions, he addressed the crowd directly. "This isn't about revenge," he said, his voice steady and measured. "It's about accountability. If my experience today helps shine a light on these issues, then perhaps we can move closer to a fairer, more equitable society." In the days that followed, the story dominated headlines nationwide. Talk shows debated the implications, politicians weighed in, and activists seized the opportunity to push for reform. The officers involved were suspended pending investigation, and calls for systemic change echoed louder than ever before. For the director, the ordeal was both humbling and infuriating. While he appreciated the outpouring of support, he couldn't shake the feeling that no one should have to endure what he went through, not even someone with his level of influence. Determined to turn this moment into action, he vowed to use his platform to advocate for meaningful reforms, ensuring that no one else would face similar injustice simply because of the color of their skin. The tension in the air was palpable, as the director stood surrounded by officers who seemed to grow more agitated with each passing second. Their initial suspicion had escalated into outright hostility, fueled by their refusal to acknowledge the glaring truth right in front of them. The director's ID lay open in his hand, its authenticity undeniable, yet the officers continued to act as though it were meaningless. One of them pointed at his briefcase again, accusing him of carrying contraband or stolen goods. "Open it," the officer barked, his tone leaving no room for negotiation. The director complied silently, placing the briefcase on the floor and unlocking it with deliberate calmness. Inside were neatly stacked papers, a laptop, and a few personal items, nothing out of the ordinary. He gestured toward the contents, inviting the officers to inspect them, but instead of easing their suspicions, this only seemed to infuriate them further. "You think we're stupid?" one snapped, leaning closer. "This could all be staged." Another chimed in, suggesting that he might have tampered with evidence before they arrived. Each accusation grew wilder than the last, building a narrative that bore no resemblance to reality. By now, a small crowd had gathered around the scene. Some travelers slowed down to watch, while others stopped entirely, pulling out their phones to record the incident. Whispers rippled through the group. "Isn't that the FBI director?" someone asked, recognizing the name on the ID card visible in the videos being filmed. Others shook their heads in disbelief. How could law enforcement officers fail to recognize such a high-ranking official? It didn't make sense. Yet, here it was, unfolding live before their eyes. For many in the audience, the situation felt surreal, a mix of shock, anger, and sadness washing over them as they witnessed the injustice firsthand. Despite the mounting pressure, the director remained composed. His years of experience in leadership roles had taught him the value of staying calm under fire. Losing his temper wouldn't solve anything. It would only escalate the situation further. Instead, he focused on finding a way to break through, the wall of prejudice blocking rational thought. "I am who I say I am," he reiterated firmly, meeting the lead officer's gaze. "You can verify my identity if you need to. Call your supervisor. Contact the FBI headquarters. Do whatever it takes." But the officers weren't interested in verification. They clung to their accusations like lifelines, unwilling or perhaps unable to admit their mistake. To do so would mean confronting the uncomfortable truth about their own biases. And so they doubled down, calling for additional backup and escalating the confrontation. More uniformed officers arrived, forming a tighter circle around the director. The once open space now felt suffocating, the weight of misplaced authority pressing down on everyone present. As the standoff dragged on, emotions ran higher. Passengers waiting in line for security checks began to voice their frustration. "What's going on here?" one man shouted. "Why are you harassing him?" A woman nearby added, "It's obvious he's telling the truth." Others joined in, their voices rising in support of the director. The officers, however, ignored the growing dissent. They were too far gone, trapped in a web of their own making. Their earlier confidence had crumbled into defensiveness, and their actions betrayed a desperate attempt to regain control. Amidst the chaos, a senior official from airport security finally arrived. Unlike the officers, this man knew exactly who the director was. He froze mid-step upon seeing the familiar face surrounded by a sea of uniforms. "What is happening here?" he demanded, his voice sharp and commanding. The officers scrambled to explain themselves, stammering over their words as they tried to justify their behavior. But the more they spoke, the clearer it became that their actions were driven not by facts, but by bias. The senior official's expression darkened as he pieced together the full picture. Realizing the enormity of their blunder, panic set in among the officers. One dropped to his knees, tears streaming down his face as he begged for forgiveness. "Please, sir, we didn't know," he cried, his voice trembling. Another followed suit, bowing his head in shame. Their earlier bravado had vanished completely, replaced by raw fear and humiliation. The transformation was startling. They had gone from accusatory and aggressive to broken and pleading in a matter of minutes. For the director, the moment was both surreal and deeply unsettling. On one hand, he understood the gravity of what had just occurred. These men had targeted him solely because of the color of his skin, disregarding every piece of evidence proving his innocence. On the other hand, he couldn't help but feel a pang of sympathy for them. They were products of a flawed system, conditioned to see danger where none existed. Still, sympathy didn't excuse their actions. Justice needed to be served, not just for him but for the countless others who had faced similar treatment without the privilege of his position. As word of the incident spread, the crowd swelled in size. News crews rushed to the scene, eager to capture the drama unfolding before them. Reporters shoved microphones toward the director, shouting questions about what had happened and how he planned to respond. Social media exploded with posts, hashtags, trending within moments. Videos of the confrontation went viral, sparking outrage and calls for accountability. People across the country watched in disbelief as footage showed officers kneeling in front of one of the most powerful men in the nation, begging for mercy. Yet, even as the world reacted, the director kept his focus. He knew this wasn't just about him. It was about exposing the cracks in a system riddled with bias and racism. While he appreciated the apologies and groveling, he understood that true change required more than individual accountability. It demanded systemic reform, starting with the institutions responsible for perpetuating these injustices. As the cameras rolled and reporters pressed for answers, he addressed the crowd directly. "This isn't about revenge," and he said, his voice steady and measured. "It's about progress. If my experience today helps shine a light on these issues, then perhaps we can move closer to a fairer, more equitable society." In the days that followed, the story dominated headlines nationwide. Talk shows debated the implications, politicians weighed in, and activists seized the opportunity to push for reform. The officers involved were suspended pending investigation, and calls for systemic change echoed louder than ever before. For the director, the ordeal was both humbling and infuriating. While he appreciated the outpouring of support, he couldn't shake the feeling that no one should have to endure what he went through, not even someone with his level of influence. Determined to turn this moment into action, he vowed to use his platform to advocate for meaningful reforms, ensuring that no one else would face similar injustice simply because of the color of their skin. He began reaching out to civil rights organizations, law enforcement agencies, and policymakers, initiating conversations about how to address racial profiling and bias within policing. He shared his story publicly, not to seek pity but to highlight the urgent need for change. "I'm fortunate," he told audiences during interviews and speeches. "I have resources and connections that allowed me to walk away unscathed. But what about those who don't? What about the young black man pulled over for no reason, the mother detained while traveling with her children, the student questioned simply for existing in a space deemed not theirs? Their stories deserve to be heard, and their struggles deserve solutions." The director also emphasized the importance of education and training within law enforcement. He called for mandatory anti-bias programs and stricter accountability measures to ensure that officers acted based on facts rather than stereotypes. His message resonated with many, inspiring grassroots movements and legislative efforts aimed at creating lasting change. Lawmakers introduced bills addressing police misconduct, while community leaders organized workshops and forums to foster dialogue between citizens and law enforcement. Despite the progress, challenges remained. Resistance to reform was strong, particularly among those who refused to acknowledge the existence of systemic racism. Critics accused the director of playing the victim, claiming that his story was an isolated incident blown out of proportion. But he remained undeterred, using his position to amplify marginalized voices and push forward initiatives designed to dismantle discriminatory practices. Through it all, the director carried the memory of that day at the airport with him, a reminder of how far society still needed to go. It wasn't enough to simply condemn injustice. Action was required. And though the road ahead promised to be long and difficult, he believed that meaningful change was possible. With determination and persistence, he hoped to leave behind a legacy, not just of leadership but of equity and justice for all. The director's resolve hardened as he reflected on the events of that fateful day at the airport. It wasn't just about what had happened to him. It was a microcosm of the larger issues plaguing society. He knew that his position gave him a unique platform, one that could amplify voices often ignored or silenced. As days turned into weeks, he began channeling his energy into advocacy work, determined to use this moment as a catalyst for change. His first step was reaching out to civil rights organizations that had been fighting these battles long before his name made headlines. He met with leaders from groups like the NAACP, Black Lives Matter, and the ACLU, listening intently to their experiences and insights. These conversations opened his eyes even further to the systemic nature of racism within institutions, particularly law enforcement. The stories they shared were harrowing, accounts of individuals stopped, searched, detained, and sometimes harmed simply because of their race. For every story like his own, there were countless others where the outcome wasn't so fortunate. Many victims never received apologies or justice. Instead, they carried the scars of discrimination silently, while perpetrators faced little to no consequences. Determined to bring attention to these injustices, the director started speaking publicly about his experience. He appeared on news programs, wrote op-eds, and delivered speeches at conferences and community events. Each time he emphasized the need for accountability and reform. "What happened to me isn't rare," he said during one televised interview. "It's part of a pattern, a symptom of a system that allows bias to dictate actions. My story is unusual only because of my title. Most people don't have the resources or influence I do to fight back." His words struck a chord with audiences across the country. People who had previously dismissed discussions of racial profiling as exaggerated or overblown began to see the issue in a new light. Here was a man with immense power and credibility, someone whose authority couldn't be questioned, yet even he hadn't been immune to prejudice. Social media played a crucial role in spreading awareness, with hashtags like Taisha Justice for All and systemic change trending repeatedly. Supporters rallied behind the director, sharing their own stories of mistreatment and calling for action. Meanwhile, the fallout from the airport incident continued to unfold. The officers involved faced intense scrutiny, not only from their superiors but also from the public. Their suspension pending investigation became national news, sparking debates about whether disciplinary measures went far enough. Some argued that losing their jobs would send a strong message, while others believed retraining and education should be prioritized. Regardless of differing opinions, one thing was clear. The officers' actions had exposed deep flaws within law enforcement protocols. In response to mounting pressure, local police departments announced plans to implement mandatory anti-bias training programs. While some praised these efforts as steps in the right direction, critics pointed out that training alone wouldn't solve the problem. "You can't unlearn racism through PowerPoint presentations," one activist remarked during a panel discussion. "We need structural changes, better hiring practices, independent oversight boards, and real consequences for misconduct." The director agreed, using his influence to push for comprehensive reforms rather than superficial fixes. As momentum grew, lawmakers took notice. Legislators introduced bills aimed at increasing transparency and accountability within policing. One proposal sought to establish a national database tracking incidents of racial profiling, ensuring that repeat offenders couldn't transfer between departments without facing repercussions. Another bill focused on banning discriminatory practices, such as stop-and-frisk policies which disproportionately targeted minority communities. Though passing these measures required navigating political hurdles, grassroots campaigns kept the pressure on, reminding elected officials that voters demanded action. The director threw his weight behind these legislative efforts, testifying before Congress and meeting with key decision-makers. His testimony was powerful, blending personal anecdotes with data-driven arguments. He spoke about the psychological toll of racial profiling, not just on individuals but on entire communities, and highlighted research showing how trust in law enforcement plummeted when bias went unchecked. Lawmakers listened closely, recognizing the urgency of the situation. Several expressed gratitude for his willingness to share his story, acknowledging that his involvement lent credibility to the cause. While progress was being made on the policy front, the director also worked to foster dialogue between citizens and law enforcement. He partnered with community organizations to host town hall meetings, bringing together residents and officers for open discussions. These sessions weren't always easy. Emotions ran high, and tensions occasionally flared, but they provided a space for honest conversation. Officers heard firsthand accounts of fear and mistrust, while community members learned about the challenges officers faced in their line of duty. Slowly but surely, bridges began to form. One particularly memorable meeting took place in a predominantly black neighborhood known for strained relations with police. The director arrived early, shaking hands and greeting attendees as they filed into the auditorium. When it was time to speak, he addressed the crowd with humility and sincerity. "I'm here because I believe in change," he said. "But I also know that change doesn't happen overnight. It starts with listening, to each other, to our fears and to our hopes. Only then can we begin to heal." His words resonated deeply, earning applause from both sides of the room. Afterward, several officers approached him privately, thanking Him for creating an environment where difficult truths could be spoken without judgment. Community members echoed similar sentiments, expressing gratitude for his leadership and commitment to equity. Though skepticism lingered among some participants, the event marked a turning point, a small but significant step toward rebuilding fractured relationships. Despite these successes, the director remained acutely aware of the challenges ahead. Resistance to reform persisted, especially in areas where entrenched systems benefited from maintaining the status quo. Critics accused him of grandstanding, claiming that his efforts were more performative than substantive. Others dismissed his calls for change as unnecessary, arguing that isolated incidents shouldn't overshadow the good work done by most officers. But he refused to be deterred, knowing that true transformation required persistence and patience. He leaned heavily on his faith and family during this period, drawing strength from their unwavering support. His wife often reminded him of the importance of self-care, urging him to take breaks and recharge. Their children, too, played a vital role, offering fresh perspectives and reminding him why the fight mattered. "Dad, you're doing this for kids like us," his youngest daughter once told him. "Kids who shouldn't have to grow up afraid of the people sworn to protect them." Her words stayed with him, fueling his determination to leave behind a better world. By now, the director's advocacy had expanded beyond racial profiling to encompass broader issues of inequality. He spoke out against voter suppression, mass incarceration, and economic disparities, framing them as interconnected parts of the same systemic problem. "You can't address one without tackling the others," he explained during a keynote speech. "Justice isn't piecemeal, it's holistic. We need to dismantle the structures that perpetuate oppression in all its forms." His expanded focus earned him praise from allies and detractors alike. Even those who disagreed with his methods acknowledged the depth of his commitment. Journalists dubbed him the conscience of the nation, a title he humbly rejected. "I'm just a man, trying to do the right thing," he insisted. The real heroes are the ones fighting these battles every day without recognition. As months passed, the director's influence continued to grow. He inspired a new generation of activists, many of whom credited him with igniting their passion for social justice. Schools invited him to speak to students, encouraging young minds to dream of a fairer future. Universities awarded him honorary degrees, citing his courage and leadership. Yet, despite the accolades, he remained grounded, always redirecting attention to the collective effort driving change. Looking back on the journey, the director felt a mix of pride and humility. Pride in what had been accomplished, but humility in knowing how much work still lay ahead. He understood that true equality wouldn't come easily or quickly. It would require sustained effort, collaboration, and sacrifice. But he believed in humanity's capacity for growth and redemption. With hope as his compass and justice as his goal, he vowed to keep pushing forward, one step at a time. The director's journey toward systemic change wasn't without its setbacks. As his advocacy gained momentum, so did the resistance against it. Critics from various corners of society began to push back, some questioning his motives and others dismissing his efforts as mere theatrics. Online trolls flooded social media with hateful comments, accusing him of exploiting his position for personal gain. Conservative pundits on television argued that he was undermining law enforcement by painting all officers with the same brush. "He's a divider, not a uniter," one commentator declared during a heated debate. Yet despite the backlash, the director remained steadfast in his mission. One of the most significant challenges came when a group of police unions filed a lawsuit challenging the proposed reforms. They claimed that measures like mandatory body cameras and independent oversight boards infringed upon officers' rights and created unnecessary hurdles in their line of duty. The legal battle dragged on for months, drawing national attention and further polarizing public opinion. Supporters of the reform saw the lawsuit as an attempt to protect bad actors within the system, while opponents argued that it safeguarded the integrity of law enforcement. The director found himself at the center of this storm, testifying in court and defending the need for accountability. During one particularly grueling day in court, The director sat quietly as lawyers dissected every detail of the airport incident. Defense attorneys questioned whether his story had been exaggerated for political purposes, insinuating that he might have provoked the confrontation himself. Though the accusation stung, the director kept his composure, answering each question with precision and clarity. When asked why he hadn't simply walked away or called for backup immediately, he responded calmly, "Because I wanted to see how far this would go. I wanted to understand what ordinary citizens face when they're powerless to stop injustice." His testimony struck a chord with many who followed the trial closely. Journalists covering the proceedings noted the stark contrast between the calm, dignified man on the stand and the hostile rhetoric surrounding him outside the courtroom. Public sentiment began to shift slightly in favor of reform, bolstered by growing evidence of systemic bias presented during the hearings. Expert witnesses testified about patterns of racial profiling, citing statistics that showed disproportionate rates of stops, searches, and arrests among minority populations. Each piece of evidence added weight to the argument that change was long overdue. Meanwhile, the director continued to build alliances across different sectors of society. He reached out to corporate leaders, urging them to use their influence to support diversity and inclusion initiatives. Several major companies responded positively, pledging funds to organizations working toward racial equity. Others committed to reviewing their own internal practices, ensuring that hiring and promotions reflected a commitment to fairness. The director also collaborated with educators, advocating for curriculum changes that emphasized critical thinking about race and history. Textbooks were updated, lesson plans revised, and teacher training programs expanded to include discussions on cultural sensitivity. In addition to these broader efforts, the director made time for smaller, more personal acts of advocacy. He visited schools in underserved communities, speaking directly to students about the importance of education and perseverance. During one such visit, he addressed a group of high school seniors preparing for college applications. "Don't let anyone tell you that your dreams are too big," he told them. "The world may try to put limits on you, but you have the power to break through those barriers. Believe in yourself, and don't be afraid to ask for help along the way." These interactions reminded him of why he had chosen this path in the first place. It wasn't just about policies and legislation, it was about people. Every child who looked up to him as a role model, every parent who thanked him for standing up, every community member who shared their story reinforced his belief that progress was possible. Even on days when the weight of the fight felt overwhelming, these moments of connection gave him strength. As the months passed, the director's work began to yield tangible results. Some cities implemented pilot programs, testing new approaches to policing, including community-based patrols and restorative justice initiatives. Officers trained in de-escalation techniques reported fewer incidents of excessive force, while residents expressed increased trust in local law enforcement. Independent review boards started investigating complaints of misconduct, holding officers accountable for their actions. While not every program succeeded immediately, the willingness to experiment signaled a shift in mindset, a recognition that old methods weren't working and something had to change. Media coverage played a crucial role in amplifying these successes. Documentaries and investigative reports highlighted communities where reform efforts were making a difference, showcasing stories of collaboration and healing. One particularly moving segment featured a young boy whose father had been wrongfully detained years earlier. Thanks to recent policy changes, the case was reopened, and the officer responsible was finally held accountable. The boy's mother tearfully thanked the director during an interview, crediting his advocacy with giving her family closure. Such stories resonated deeply with viewers, inspiring hope and reinforcing the importance of persistence. Yet, even as victories mounted, the director knew that true equality required addressing deeper societal issues. Economic disparities, inadequate healthcare, and unequal access to education all contributed to cycles of poverty and disenfranchisement. To tackle these root causes, he partnered with nonprofits and government agencies to launch initiatives aimed at creating opportunities for marginalized groups. Job training programs, affordable housing projects, and scholarships for underrepresented students became priorities. He believed that empowering individuals economically and socially would ultimately lead to greater stability and cohesion within communities. Despite these strides, the director faced moments of doubt. Late at night, after long days filled with meetings and speeches, he sometimes wondered if his efforts were enough. Was he doing too little? Too much? Could one person truly make a difference in the face of centuries-old injustices? On such nights, he turned to his faith and family for solace. His wife reminded him that perfection wasn't the goal. Progress was. "You're planting seeds," she said. "Some will grow quickly, others slowly, but every seed matters." Her words stayed with him, grounding him whenever uncertainty crept in. They reminded him that change was a collective effort, requiring patience and resilience. He thought often of the young boy whose father's case had been resolved, the students, inspired to pursue careers in public service, and the officers willing to confront their biases. These were the seeds he was planting, and though they might take years to bear fruit, he trusted that they would eventually flourish. Public opinion continued to evolve as well. Polls showed increasing support for reform measures, with a majority of Americans now acknowledging the existence of systemic racism within institutions. Politicians who had once dismissed calls for change began incorporating equity into their platforms, recognizing the shifting tide. Even some former critics softened their stance, admitting that the director's persistence had forced them to reconsider their views. "I didn't want to listen at first," one admitted during a town hall meeting. "But seeing what he's done, the lives he's touched, I can't ignore it anymore." By the end of the year, the director's impact was undeniable. Awards poured in from organizations around the world, honoring his leadership and dedication to justice. Yet he accepted each accolade with humility, always redirecting praise to the countless individuals contributing to the movement. "This isn't about me," he said repeatedly. "It's about us, all of us working together to create a better future." Looking ahead, the director knew there was still much to be done. Laws could be passed, policies rewritten, and systems reformed, but lasting change depended on changing hearts and minds. Education, empathy, and understanding were the keys to breaking down barriers that had stood for generations. With renewed determination, he vowed to continue fighting, not just for himself or his family, but for everyone who deserved a fair chance at life. And so, the director pressed forward, one step at a time. Each speech, each meeting, each conversation brought him closer to the vision he carried in his heart. A world where no one was judged by the color of their skin, where opportunity was truly equal, and where justice prevailed for all. It was a daunting task, but he believed in humanity's capacity for growth and redemption. With hope as his compass and justice as his goal, he walked boldly into the unknown, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. As the director's advocacy work entered its second year, the landscape of social justice began to shift in profound ways. The seeds he had planted were sprouting, but they required constant nurturing to grow into something sustainable. He understood that change wasn't linear. It ebbed and flowed, facing resistance at every turn, but he refused to let setbacks deter him. Instead, he embraced them as opportunities to learn and adapt, using each challenge as fuel to push harder for progress. One of the most significant developments came when a major city announced plans to overhaul its policing system entirely. Inspired by the reforms championed by the director, local officials proposed replacing traditional law enforcement models with community-centered approaches. Officers would undergo extensive training not only in de-escalation techniques, but also in cultural competency and mental health awareness. Additionally, unarmed mediators would handle nonviolent disputes, reducing the likelihood of unnecessary confrontations. The initiative drew national attention, with experts hailing it as a bold step toward reimagining public safety. The director traveled to the city to support the rollout, meeting with both residents and officers to discuss the transition. During one town hall meeting, an elderly woman stood up and shared her story. For years, she had avoided calling the police, fearing that her grandson might be profiled or mistreated if they arrived at her door. But now, she said, her voice trembling with emotion. "I feel like I can trust them again, like maybe they're here to help us instead of hurt us." Her words resonated deeply with everyone present, underscoring the importance of rebuilding fractured relationships between communities and law enforcement. While the new model showed promise, implementing it wasn't without challenges. Some veteran officers resisted the changes, arguing that they undermined their authority and made their jobs more difficult. Others worried about how the public would perceive them during the transition period, fearing backlash from those who remained skeptical of reform. The director listened patiently to their concerns, acknowledging the difficulty of adapting to unfamiliar methods. "Change is uncomfortable," he told them, "but staying the same is unsustainable. If we want to earn back trust, we have to be willing to evolve." To ease the transition, he worked closely with psychologists and conflict resolution specialists to design workshops tailored to address specific fears and frustrations. These sessions encouraged open dialogue, allowing officers to express their doubts while learning practical strategies for embracing the new approach. Over time, many began to see the value in the changes, reporting improved interactions with residents and a renewed sense of purpose in their work. Back on the national stage, the director continued to advocate for broader policy shifts. He lobbied Congress to pass comprehensive legislation addressing systemic racism across multiple sectors, from criminal justice to education to housing. His efforts gained traction when a bipartisan group of lawmakers introduced a bill known as the Equity Act, which aimed to eliminate discriminatory practices embedded in federal programs. Though contentious debates delayed its passage, the mere existence of such a proposal marked a turning point in political discourse. Public support for the Equity Act grew steadily, driven largely by grassroots campaigns mobilized by activists, inspired by the director's leadership. Social media played a pivotal role with hashtags like #PassTheEquityAct trending repeatedly. Stories of individuals affected by systemic inequities flooded platforms, humanizing the statistics and data often cited in legislative hearings. One viral post featured a single mother recounting how redlining policies had prevented her grandparents from owning property, perpetuating cycles of poverty that persisted into her generation. "This isn't just history," she wrote. "It's my life, and it's happening right now." The director amplified these voices whenever possible, inviting ordinary citizens to share their experiences during congressional hearings and press conferences. Their testimonies added urgency to the call for action, reminding policymakers that behind every statistic was a person struggling to overcome barriers beyond their control. Lawmakers listened intently, many visibly moved by the raw honesty and vulnerability displayed before them. Despite growing momentum, opposition remained fierce. Critics argued that the Equity Act went too far, claiming it amounted to government overreach and reverse discrimination. Talk radio hosts railed against the bill, accusing the director of dividing the nation along racial lines. Protesters gathered outside the Capitol, holding signs that read "All Lives Matter" and chanting slogans denouncing what they viewed as preferential treatment. Yet, even in the face of hostility, the director maintained his composure, refusing to engage in divisive rhetoric. Instead, he doubled down on his message of unity and shared responsibility. In a widely watched interview, he addressed critics directly, appealing to their sense of fairness and decency. "This isn't about pitting one group against another," he explained. "It's about leveling the playing field so everyone has an equal chance to succeed. When we invest in marginalized communities, we strengthen our entire society. It's not charity, it's common sense." His words struck a chord with moderate audiences, helping sway undecided voters and lawmakers, still on the fence about supporting the bill. Polls showed increasing approval ratings for the Equity Act, particularly among younger demographics eager to dismantle outdated systems. Encouraged by this trend, the director intensified his outreach efforts, partnering with influencers, celebrities, and faith leaders to spread awareness and generate momentum. Meanwhile, his advocacy extended beyond legislative halls and courtrooms. He launched a nationwide tour, visiting towns and cities across the country to engage directly with people from all walks of life. In rural areas where skepticism about reform ran high, he listened attentively to concerns, offering thoughtful responses rooted in empathy and understanding. In urban centers grappling with entrenched inequality, he celebrated small victories while encouraging continued collaboration. Everywhere he went, he emphasized the importance of collective action, reminding crowds that no single individual could achieve lasting change alone. During one stop in the Midwest, the director spoke to a packed auditorium filled with farmers, factory workers, and small business owners. Many attendees admitted they had initially dismissed his efforts as irrelevant to their lives, believing systemic racism was a problem confined to big cities. But after hearing his explanation of how economic disparities and discriminatory lending practices affected rural communities, several expressed newfound appreciation for the interconnectedness of these issues. "I never thought about it that way," one man confessed. "If fixing this helps my neighbor, then I'm all for it." These moments of connection reinforced the director's belief in the power of storytelling to bridge divides. By sharing personal anecdotes and highlighting real-world examples, he helped people see themselves in the struggle for justice. Whether speaking to students dreaming of brighter futures or retirees reflecting on past injustices, he tailored his message to resonate with diverse audiences, fostering a sense of shared humanity. As the year drew to a close, the director reflected on the progress made and the work still ahead. While landmark victories like the Equity Act signaled hope, entrenched systems wouldn't crumble overnight. Racism, bias, and inequality were deeply woven into the fabric of society, requiring sustained effort to unravel. But he took comfort in knowing that countless individuals were joining the fight, inspired by his example to demand better for themselves and their communities. In private moments, he allowed himself to dream of a future shaped by equity and inclusion. He imagined children growing up free from the fear of profiling, young adults pursuing careers unencumbered by prejudice, and elders living out their golden years with dignity and respect. Though achieving such a vision seemed daunting, he clung to the belief that incremental progress mattered. Every policy changed, every mind opened, and every heart touched brought the world closer to that ideal. And so, the director carried on, fueled by determination and guided by hope. Each day brought new challenges but also new opportunities to make a difference. Whether addressing crowds, meeting with policymakers, or simply listening to someone's story, he approached every task with the same unwavering commitment: to leave behind a legacy of justice and compassion. For him, it wasn't just a mission, it was a calling. And though the road ahead promised to be long and arduous, he walked it with courage, knowing that together, humanity could build a brighter tomorrow. As the director's journey continued into its third year, the ripple effects of his advocacy began to manifest in ways he could never have anticipated. The Equity Act, once a contentious proposal met with fierce resistance, finally passed after months of negotiation and compromise. It wasn't perfect, few pieces of landmark legislation were, but it represented a monumental step forward. For the first time in decades, federal policies explicitly addressed systemic inequities across housing, education, healthcare, and criminal justice. The director stood beside the president as the bill was signed into law, his expression a mix of pride and solemnity. He knew this was just the beginning. The passage of the Equity Act sparked a wave of momentum that rippled through state legislatures and local governments. Cities and towns across the country began implementing their own versions of reform, tailoring solutions to fit the unique needs of their communities. In some places, police departments adopted stricter accountability measures, while others focused on economic empowerment programs for marginalized groups. Schools introduced curricula centered around diversity and inclusion, teaching students not only about history, but also about empathy and understanding. Businesses pledged to diversify leadership roles and close wage gaps, recognizing that true progress required action beyond words. Yet even as these changes took root, the director remained vigilant. He understood that laws and policies alone couldn't dismantle centuries of injustice. Real transformation depended on shifting cultural attitudes, the deeply ingrained beliefs and biases that perpetuated inequality. To tackle this challenge, he launched an ambitious initiative called Voices United, aimed at fostering dialogue between people from different backgrounds. The program brought together individuals who might otherwise never cross paths, farmers and factory workers, tech entrepreneurs and teachers, immigrants and lifelong citizens, to share their stories and find common ground. One particularly impactful event under the Voices United banner took place in a small southern town known for its racial divides. The director personally facilitated the gathering, inviting residents to speak openly about their fears, frustrations, and hopes for the future. At first, tensions ran high. Long-held grievances surfaced, raw and unfiltered, as participants aired grievances they had kept bottled up for years. But as the hours passed, something remarkable happened. People started listening, not just hearing, but truly listening to one another. A white shopkeeper tearfully apologized for ignoring black customers in the past, vowing to do better moving forward. A young Latina mother shared her struggles with access to affordable childcare, prompting a retired couple to offer free babysitting services within the community. By the end of the day, tentative friendships had formed, laying the groundwork for lasting change. These grassroots efforts complemented larger-scale initiatives led by the director. He partnered with media outlets to produce documentaries and podcasts highlighting stories of resilience and reconciliation. One series followed a group of formerly incarcerated individuals as they rebuilt their lives with support from reentry programs funded by the Equity Act. Another explored the history of redlining and its lingering impact on urban neighborhoods, featuring interviews with families still fighting for home ownership. These projects humanized complex issues, making them accessible to wider audiences and inspiring viewers to take action in their own communities. On college campuses, the director became a sought-after speaker, drawing crowds eager to hear his insights on leadership and activism. Students bombarded him with questions about how to sustain movements amid adversity, how to balance idealism with pragmatism, and how to stay hopeful when progress seemed slow. His answers were always thoughtful, blending wisdom gained from experience with practical advice tailored to younger generations. Don't wait for permission to lead, he told them during one campus visit. Start where you are, use what you have, and build from there. Every act of kindness, every effort to educate yourself and others, it all matters. His message resonated deeply, especially among young activists determined to carry the torch of social justice into the future. Many credited him with reigniting their passion for advocacy, reminding them that change was possible even in the face of overwhelming odds. Social media platforms buzzed with tributes and thank you messages, with hashtags like "inspired by the director" trending regularly. Memes featuring his quotes went viral, turning him into an unlikely internet icon. Though amused by the memes, he remained humble, redirecting attention to the collective effort driving the movement. Despite the accolades, the director faced moments of introspection. Late at night, after long days filled with speeches, meetings, and strategy sessions, he often reflected on the cost of his advocacy, not just for himself but for his family. His wife and children had sacrificed privacy and normalcy, enduring scrutiny and occasional hostility from those opposed to his work. They rarely complained, but he noticed the toll it took: the weary smiles, the guarded conversations, the subtle shifts in behavior. Guilt gnawed at him, though his loved ones reassured him repeatedly that they supported his mission wholeheartedly. "You're doing this for us too," his eldest son once said during a quiet evening at home. "For a world where I don't have to explain why someone looks at me differently because of my skin color, where my little sister can dream without limits." His words struck a chord, reminding the director of the stakes involved. This wasn't just about policy or politics. It was about creating a better future for the next generation. With renewed resolve, he vowed to keep pushing forward, no matter how daunting the road ahead. By the fourth year, the director's influence extended far beyond national borders. International leaders sought his counsel on addressing similar challenges within their own countries. He traveled to Europe, Africa, and Asia, sharing strategies for combating systemic racism and promoting equity. In South Africa, he visited townships ravaged by apartheid's legacy, meeting with activists working to bridge divides. In Brazil, he collaborated with educators developing anti-bias curricula for public schools. Everywhere he went, he emphasized the universality of the struggle for justice, reminding audiences that humanity's shared aspirations transcended geography and culture. Back home, the director turned his focus to ensuring the sustainability of reforms. He worked closely with researchers and data analysts to track the impact of new policies, identifying areas that needed adjustment. Transparency dashboards were created, allowing citizens to monitor progress in real time and hold officials accountable. Community feedback loops ensured that voices from the ground influenced decision-making processes, preventing top-down approaches that ignored lived experiences. As the 5th anniversary of the airport incident approached, the director prepared for a nationwide tour commemorating the milestone. Each stop on the tour featured panels, workshops, and celebrations designed to honor achievements while acknowledging ongoing challenges. During the kickoff event, he delivered a powerful speech, reflecting on the journey thus far. 5 years ago, I stood at an airport checkpoint facing prejudice I never thought I'd encounter, he began, his voice steady yet filled with emotion. Today I stand before you as proof that change is possible, but only if we commit to it fully. Let us continue to strive for a world where everyone is treated with dignity and respect, regardless of race, class, or circumstance. The crowd erupted in applause, many rising to their feet in solidarity. Tears streamed down faces as people embraced one another, united by a shared vision of hope and possibility. For the director, the moment encapsulated everything he had fought for, a glimpse of what society could become if given the chance. In the years that followed, the director's legacy grew exponentially. Textbooks included chapters detailing his advocacy, portraying him not just as a leader but as a catalyst for global change. Streets were named after him, murals painted in his honor, and scholarships established to support aspiring activists. Yet despite the recognition, he remained grounded, always quick to remind others that the fight belonged to everyone. "I'm just one person," he would say. "True greatness lies in our ability to lift each other up." And so the director pressed onward, guided by faith, fueled by purpose, and driven by love for humanity. Every day brought new challenges, but also new opportunities to make a difference, whether addressing world leaders, mentoring young activists, or simply listening to someone's story. He approached each task with humility and grace. For him, this wasn't just a career, it was a calling. And though the road ahead promised to be long and arduous, he walked it with courage, knowing that together humanity could build a brighter tomorrow.